The termination letter hit the floor before the single father even realized what had happened. Standing beneath the bright daytime lights of the International Arrivals Hall, with one hand gripping his old suitcase and the other holding his young daughter's backpack, Arlen Voss watched his CEO walk away as if he had just thrown away something worthless. Around them, travelers hurried past with rolling luggage, families reunited, children laughed, and airport announcements echoed through the vast glass terminal. But for Arlen, the entire world seemed to stop. He had just returned from a 12-hour overseas flight after representing the company on one of its most important assignments, only to be fired in front of hundreds of strangers. His 7-year-old daughter, Naya, looked up at him with confused eyes, unaware that the envelope in her father's trembling hand could change everything they had planned for their future. What neither the CEO nor anyone watching that humiliating scene knew was that the quiet man being dismissed at arrivals had spent years building something far more powerful than the job they had just taken away from him. If you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage, family, and second chances. Arlen had never been the kind of man people noticed when he entered a room. At 38, he dressed simply, spoke carefully, and avoided showing off even when he had every reason to be proud. He had become a single father after his wife, Mireya, passed away several years earlier, leaving him to raise Naya while carrying the weight of grief he rarely discussed. Every morning, he packed Naya's lunch, checked her school bag, prepared breakfast, and then rushed to work before the city became crowded. His career at Meridian Crest Holdings had begun as an entry-level logistics position, and over 12 years he had quietly transformed himself into one of the company's most capable international operations managers. He understood supply chains, negotiated with foreign partners, solved impossible shipping problems, and could walk into a failing overseas operation and make it profitable. Yet because he never demanded praise, people often assumed he was simply dependable rather than extraordinary. His CEO, Cashin Rourke, was the opposite. Cashin was polished, confident, and obsessed with appearances. He believed power had to be visible. He liked expensive cars, private meetings, dramatic announcements, and employees who made him feel important. Arlen had always remained beneath his radar, which was exactly how Arlen preferred it. What Cashin did not know was that during his years at Meridian Crest, Arlen had quietly invested nearly every spare dollar he earned into small overseas logistics companies. He started with a struggling freight warehouse in Valmiera, then partnered with a shipping technology firm in Cerelia, and eventually acquired minority stakes in several transport and storage companies across different countries. He did not do it to become famous. He did it because he wanted Naya to grow up knowing that her father had built something she could someday be proud of. He kept every investment private through legitimate holding companies, and even his closest co-workers believed he was simply an ordinary manager trying to survive. The trouble began when Meridian Crest started losing money in one of its major international divisions. Cashin needed someone to blame, and Arlen was convenient. Arlen had repeatedly warned management that the division's problems were caused by reckless contracts approved by senior executives, but his reports were ignored. Then, after Arlen successfully completed a difficult overseas assignment that saved the company millions, he returned home expecting nothing more than a quiet evening with Naya. Instead, Cashin personally waited at arrivals. The CEO barely looked at him before handing over the termination letter. Arlen tried to understand what had happened, but Cashin had already decided that Arlen was responsible for the overseas losses. He accused him of poor leadership, financial mismanagement, and failing to meet expectations. Arlen knew the accusations were false, but standing in the middle of an airport, he realized there was no point arguing. He quietly picked up the letter, placed it inside his suitcase, took Naya's hand, and walked away. That night, Naya noticed her father sitting alone at the kitchen table long after dinner. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic outside. Arlen stared at the termination letter while calculating rent, school expenses, groceries, and the small savings account he had promised himself he would never touch. Naya eventually came into the kitchen carrying her favorite stuffed rabbit. She climbed into the chair beside him and rested her head against his shoulder. Arlen forced a smile and told her everything would be okay. She believed him because children often believe the people they love even when those people are struggling to believe themselves. After she went to bed, Arlen opened his laptop. For the first time in years, he logged into the private investment accounts he had built quietly. What appeared on the screen made him pause. One of his overseas companies had just completed a major acquisition. Another had signed a long-term transportation agreement with several international manufacturers. A third had expanded into 3 new markets. Together, the companies were now worth many times more than Meridian Crest's entire struggling division. Arlen leaned back in his chair, not smiling because he suddenly understood something important. He had spent years believing his job was his security. It wasn't. His real security had been built quietly while everyone was busy underestimating him. The next morning, Arlen did not call Cashin. He did not beg for his position back. Instead, he called the people he had trusted overseas and told them he was ready to move forward independently. Within days, meetings were arranged. Within weeks, his private holding group announced a major international expansion. Business newspapers began reporting on an unknown entrepreneur who had assembled a remarkable network of logistics, technology, and transportation companies across several continents. The name behind the empire was Arlen Voss. Back at Meridian Crest, confusion quickly turned into panic. Cashin discovered that several of the overseas partners he had dismissed as insignificant were actually connected to Arlen. Worse, Meridian Crest was heavily dependent on companies that Arlen's group now controlled. The same CEO who had fired Arlen at an airport suddenly found himself sitting in a boardroom looking at financial reports that revealed just how much power had shifted. Arlen had not built his empire overnight. He had built it quietly, patiently, while working for the company that never noticed him. A few weeks later, Cashin requested a meeting. This time, Arlen entered the room differently. He was still dressed simply. He still carried no expensive accessories. But there was a calmness in his face that had not been there before. Cashin expected anger. Instead, Arlen listened. The CEO admitted that he had judged Arlen unfairly and that the termination had been based on incomplete information. He asked Arlen to consider returning to Meridian Crest in a senior leadership position. Arlen looked across the table and thought about the airport. He remembered the envelope hitting the floor. He remembered Naya standing beside him. He remembered how small he had felt for those few seconds. But he also remembered what happened afterward. He realized that humiliation had not destroyed him. It had pushed him toward a future he might never have discovered if he had remained comfortable. Arlen declined the job. He did not insult Cashin. He did not demand revenge. He simply explained that he had spent too many years proving his value to people who only noticed him after he became powerful. Then he offered something Cashin never expected. Arlen agreed to help Meridian Crest stabilize its overseas operations, but only if the company created a program to protect employees from unfair termination, support single parents, and provide financial education to workers who wanted to build a more secure future. Cashin was stunned. Arlen could have destroyed him. Instead, he chose to make the workplace better for people who were still where he had once been. Months later, Arlen brought Naya to the headquarters of his new international company. The building was bright and modern, filled with employees from different countries working together. Naya walked beside her father, holding his hand as they passed a wall displaying the company's values. At the center was one simple sentence: never underestimate the person quietly carrying the heaviest load. Arlen stopped when he saw it. Naya looked up and smiled. She asked if he had written it. Arlen shook his head and told her that sometimes the most important lessons came from difficult days. He never told Naya that the airport had been one of the hardest moments of his life. He wanted her to remember something better, that losing a job did not mean losing your worth, that being overlooked did not mean being insignificant, and that sometimes life closes one door because you have been standing in front of a much bigger one without realizing it. Years later, Arlen still remembered the day Cashin handed him that termination letter. He could have remembered it as the day his life fell apart. Instead, he remembered it as the day his life finally changed direction. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden inside every painful ending. Sometimes we think rejection means we were not good enough. Sometimes we believe losing something means we have failed. But there are moments when life removes us from a place simply because we have outgrown it. The person who looks defeated today may be carrying a future nobody else can see. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. You never know whose difficult day your simple engagement might help brighten. And before the story ends, I have one special request: comment the words, "I will keep going," if you believe that no setback, no rejection, and no painful chapter should be allowed to decide the ending of your story. Because Arlen learned something that day at the airport that money could never teach him: a person's worth is not measured by the title printed on their business card, the job they lose, or the way someone treats them when they are powerless. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is quietly building an entire future. And when that future finally arrives, everyone who once overlooked them realizes that they were never watching a failure at all. They were watching someone become unstoppable.